While the G20 can't get over the war, the Americans are working on another front, fighting China. Apparently, the US is now convinced that it has a quote-unquote existential struggle with China. So in a rare show of unity, Democrats and Republicans are coming together to fight the dragon. Washington is also working on what's being called an anti-China coalition. It is threatening Beijing against giving weapons to Moscow. But America itself is sending more weapons to Taiwan. And of course, it has started talking a lot more about the Wuhan virus leaking from a Chinese lab. So connect the dots and you'll see how the US is preparing to fight China on multiple fronts. We'll start with what US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said about China this week.
We've been watching it very carefully from day one. And the reason that I raised this not only with Wang Yi last week, but also publicly, along with other colleagues in the administration, is because of concern we have based on information that we have that China is considering moving beyond the non-lethal support that some of its companies have been providing to actually lethal material support for Russia's war effort in Ukraine. And what I can share with you is that we did very clearly warn China about the implications and consequences of going through with providing such support. We will not hesitate, for example, to target Chinese companies or individuals that violate our sanctions or otherwise engage in supporting the Russian war effort.
An open threat to China. If it gives lethal aid to Russia, it will suffer consequences. That's what Blinken said. And now his government is walking the talk. The US is talking to its close allies about sanctioning China. It has reached out to members of the G7, the group of 7 countries, the world's top 7 economies, minus China, of course. Washington is exploring sanctions on China, but it's not going to be easy. Because China is not Russia. Countries around the world, including in the West, have business interests with China. They may not be ready to fight it. In fact, one of them says there isn't enough intel about China providing support to Russia. The US on its part says it is constantly providing all relevant intelligence to its allies. And therein lies the crack in America's embryonic alliance against China. Nonetheless, Washington is exploring the possibility of sanctions. And while it prohibits China from giving weapons to Russia, the US itself continues to give more weapons to Taiwan. Of course, they can justify it, but the contrast is obvious. The US has approved a $619 million arms sale to Taiwan. This includes missiles for Taiwan's F-16 fighter jets. They're talking about hundreds of missiles and $619 million, figures that China won't like. And there's more. On Tuesday, the House Foreign Affairs Committee passed 8 bills. What do these bills do? They either support Taiwan or they counter China. Either way, they hurt China's interests and ambitions. And from Beijing's perspective, Washington is being hypocritical. If the US can arm Taiwan, why can't China arm Russia? That's their question. And China isn't as polite as the US when it comes to issuing threats.
We urge the US to pull back before it's too late, stop stepping on the edge, taking salami tactics, and breaking through red lines over the Taiwan question, as well as quit confusing the public and talking nonsense. If the US persists, it will cause severe consequences and pay a heavy price.
Quit confusing the public and talking nonsense. China is not mincing words. It is also unwittingly bringing together American lawmakers, and at prime time no less. There's a new Congress in place on Capitol Hill. Republicans control the House of Representatives. Democrats have a thin lead in the Senate. There's an important committee in the House of Representatives. It's called the House China Select Committee. This committee focuses on economic and security competition between the US and China. It's more or less the committee that drives US policy vis-a-vis China. On Tuesday, this committee had a session, and China became a punching bag. And China was punched really hard.
There's no doubt that the growing aggression of the Chinese Communist Party poses a generational threat to the United States. From using a spy balloon to surveil some of America's most sensitive military sites, to their theft of upwards of $600 billion of American IP every year, much of which goes into their military, to their continued military aggression and expansion in the Indo-Pacific.
Republicans were more focused on China's ideological, technological, economic, and military threat. Democrats made a call for the US to strengthen its democracy and industries. The bottom line is this: there is now bipartisan support for the US to counter China. Almost every congressional leader now recognizes China as a threat to the world and the US. And they want to take concrete action to offset that threat. The Biden administration is taking baby steps to build a global coalition against China. One of the prerequisites for that is for both Democrats and Republicans to be on the same page. For now, they seem to be on one. One can't be so sure of tomorrow, though.